I'm Cassandra Ellery, and 5 years ago, my sister ripped my life apart. She didn't just steal my fiancé, she paraded him in front of me at every family gathering, as if I was supposed to applaud her. I stayed quiet. Not because I was weak, but because I had already decided the day she took him would be the last day she had power over me. Last Saturday, I walked into the charity gala with my husband Marcus. The room was lit in gold and silver, the kind of place where every glance is a calculation. I knew she would be there draped in diamonds. He probably bought her, carrying the air of someone who thinks the past is buried. She didn't notice me at first, but then her gaze slid past the waiters over the champagne glasses and landed on the man beside me. Her smile faltered. I could see the recognition hit like ice water. Marcus shook hands with a board member, his other hand resting lightly on the small of my back, protective certain. My sister's eyes widened, her fingers tightening around her glass. I didn't need to say a word. She knew exactly who he was, and why, after all these years, the balance had shifted. 5 years earlier, the night everything cracked, the house smelled of cinnamon and roast chicken. It was supposed to be my engagement dinner. My fiancé Daniel had spent weeks planning it with me, down to the playlist and the wine. My sister Lila offered to help with the setup. I should have known better. Halfway through the evening, after the toasts, she slipped into the seat beside him. She laughed at every word he said, leaning in just close enough for her perfume to mingle with his cologne. It was subtle at first. Then, during dessert, she took his hand. I remember the way my mother's gaze darted to mine, quick and sharp, as if silently telling me not to make a scene. My father kept carving the roast, avoiding my eyes altogether. In that moment, I realized something. They weren't shocked. They were expecting it. When Daniel announced right there at my own engagement dinner that he and Lila were in love and had to be honest, the room went silent except for the hum of the chandelier. No one defended me. No one told them to stop. Lila squeezed his hand like she'd won a prize. My parents smiled thin and polite, as if the humiliation of their eldest daughter was a small price for whatever they thought they were gaining. I left quietly, my heels clicking against the hardwood like a clock counting down. No shouting, no tears, just a hollow calm settling into my bones. Because I understood something they didn't. They thought they'd ended me. But I was already planning the life I'd build without them, a life so far from their reach, they'd only hear about it in whispers. The following morning, I packed a single suitcase. I didn't leave a note. I didn't answer calls. I deleted every number except the few that mattered for work. And then I disappeared into the city like smoke, carrying nothing but the sting of betrayal and the quiet determination to become untouchable. What I didn't know then was that one day, the man standing beside me would be the final piece of that plan, and the reason my sister's perfect little world would crack wide open. The first year after I left was the hardest and the quietest. I rented a one-bedroom above a bookstore in a part of the city my family would never set foot in. No one there knew me as the daughter of Charles and Elaine Whitlock. I was just Cassandra, the woman who worked late and kept her curtains half closed. By day, I buried myself in work. I'd been in marketing before, but now I treated every project like a stepping stone. I said yes to jobs no one wanted, learned the numbers side of the business, and taught myself the contracts so no one could trick me again. My nights were for courses, negotiation, finance leadership. It was exhausting, but exhaustion was easier to bear than the ache of betrayal. Sometimes in the still hours, I'd remember Lila's smirk as she held Daniel's hand, the way my parents looked relieved instead of horrified. It didn't make me angry anymore. It made me focused. Every small win felt like a brick in the wall I was building between their world and mine. It was during a late-night charity gala, work-related, nothing personal, that I met Marcus Hale. Tall, quiet, with a gaze that seemed to notice more than he let on. We ended up at the same table, making polite conversation over salmon and wine. He didn't ask about my family. He didn't even seem curious. Instead, he asked about the marketing strategy I'd presented earlier that week and the way I'd handled a pushy investor. By the end of the night, I knew two things about Marcus. He was sharp, and he was used to making decisions that mattered. What I didn't know yet was that he came from a world my family would never be able to touch, a world where respect wasn't bought with charm, but earned through results and loyalty. We started working together on a project a few months later, then another. Slowly, friendship became trust. Trust became something deeper. And in that process, I built not just a career, but a life. 5 years passed before our paths would cross with my family again. And when they did, Marcus wasn't just the man I loved. He was the one man who could shatter every illusion Lila had built around herself. It started with a cream-colored envelope slid under my office door. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly, Lila's looping practiced script. Inside was an embossed card, Whitlock Family Charity Gala, celebrating 10 years of service. Attendance requested. Requested. Not invited. As if they were summoning me. For a moment, I almost tossed it in the trash. 5 years had passed since I'd heard their voices in person. Every interaction since had been filtered through polite, impersonal emails about inherited property or old accounts. They had erased me from their lives, and I'd been fine with that. More than fine. But I wasn't the same woman they'd last seen. And the truth was, I was curious. Not about them, but about what it would feel like to walk into their perfect little world again on my own terms. When I told Marcus about the invitation, he listened without interrupting. Then he simply said, "If you go as yourself, not as their daughter, as..." His tone wasn't sharp, but it was steady, the kind of steadiness that came from knowing exactly who you are. So I planned. I didn't call to confirm. I didn't send a note. On the night of the gala, I wore black silk and a diamond pin Marcus had given me last winter, understated but impossible to ignore. My hair was swept up my heels, sharp enough to make each step sound deliberate. The venue was exactly as I remembered, white columns, glittering chandeliers, and guests who measured worth in names and net worth. I moved through the crowd like a shadow, exchanging nods, offering quiet smiles. People looked at me with polite curiosity, trying to place me, but no one dared to ask. Then I saw her. Lila, in a pale gold gown, her laugh bright and brittle, as she held court with a circle of admirers. Daniel wasn't with her. She was thinner than I remembered, her eyes sharper, but her posture still carried the same smug tilt. She didn't see me at first, but when she did, her smile faltered. Only for a second, but it was enough to tell me she'd thought she'd never have to see me again. She had no idea the man I'd walked in with was about to rewrite that assumption. Marcus arrived 20 minutes after I did, because that's how he moves through rooms like this. Never rushed, never late, always on time for himself. I watched him cross the marble foyer, accepting a handshake from the event director, nodding to a pair of donors whose names were etched in brass on the wall. He looked effortless in a midnight tuxedo, the kind that didn't wear him. When his eyes found mine, the corners crinkled. He didn't kiss me. He didn't need the gesture to make a point. He simply offered his arm, and I took it. We hadn't made 2 steps toward the ballroom before the foundation's chair intercepted us. "Marcus!" he said, relief in his voice. "We're lining up the speakers. The press pit's already crowding the west balcony." "I'll be brief," Marcus replied. "This night isn't about me." It was only a sentence, but I saw 2 heads swivel nearby. Recognition works like a ripple. It touches one person, and then another, and then the whole surface moves. When we entered the ballroom, the band slipped into something softer. The ceiling was a wash of warm gold, catching the edges of crystal and glass, until the air itself seemed to glitter. Waiters flowed like a tide trays of champagne canapes, the quiet choreography of money, pretending to be generosity. Lila noticed us immediately this time. Her gaze landed on Marcus, jumped to me, and then returned to him, as if the first look had been a mistake. She tilted her chin, confusion cracking into something sharper. I guided us toward the donor board, so Marcus could sign the evening ledger. The coordinator handed him a pen with both hands, reverent as if passing a baton. Beside his name were the words, "Matching Endowment, Anonymous Benefactor." So the secret was out. The band paused. A microphone squeaked. The chair stepped onto the small stage and tapped the glass lectern. Friends, before we begin, the pledge is a word from the man who made tonight's expansion possible through his firm's partnership and through personal support. Please welcome Marcus Hale. Applause isn't always loud. Sometimes it's respectful, standing carefully between curiosity and awe. Marcus squeezed my hand once, before he let go and climbed the steps. He didn't launch into a speech. He just stood there until the room quieted around him. I grew up watching my mother figure out the grocery bill with a pencil, he said. Community kept our heads above water. So when I can, I give back to the places that taught me the difference between wealth and worth. He nodded toward the back rows where the program's scholarship students sat with their families' starched collars and shy smiles. Tonight is for them. He kept it to 90 seconds. The chair loved him for it. So did the press. When he returned, Lila was already moving. She broke from her circle with a smile that tried to be casual and landed somewhere between startled and hungry. "Mr. Hale," she said, extending a hand like she was already in a photograph. "I'm Lila Whitlock. We have mutual acquaintances." Marcus took her hand because he is polite. "Good to meet you." I watched the exact instant she connected the dots. Her pupils tightened, her breath hitched. "Cassandra," she said, her voice softening to a register I recognized from childhood, the one she used when she wanted something. "You didn't say—" "I wasn't asked," I said. She laughed, a high little sound that bounced off the crystal and disappeared. Small world. I actually pitched a campaign to Hale and North 2 years ago. She turned to Marcus, leaning in just enough to catch the light on her cheekbone. "We didn't get it, but well, I've admired your work since the Durant acquisition." Marcus's expression didn't change. "We passed on that campaign because the media plan relied on manufactured scarcity. Our foundation funds actual scarcity food housing access. I'm sure you understand the difference." The smile held for a heartbeat. Then it slipped. Color drained from her face the way tide leaves a shore steady inevitable. She wasn't just pale, she was unmoored. Her eyes flicked to the press across the room, then back to Marcus, then to me, as if someplace in that triad there had to be a safe landing. "Excuse me?" she murmured, reaching for a champagne flute from a passing tray and missing it by a fraction. The glass wobbled. I steadied it with 2 fingers and passed it back to the waiter. She swallowed and tried again. "I didn't realize you two knew each other." "We're married," I said, and felt nothing but the simple truth of it settle in my chest, like a stone perfectly fitted to a palm. Something inside her faltered. I could see the math in her eyes, the way she recalculated history, the girl she'd pushed aside at 29, the man she'd taken because she could, the silence she mistook for defeat. And now this. Marcus glanced toward the student tables. "If you'll excuse me, I promised to meet the robotics team." He nodded to Lila, a courtesy not an invitation, and to me, a look that said everything we hadn't needed to say all night. Then he walked away. Lila watched him go, lips parting like there might be a plea there or a question she couldn't shape. The band began a slow standard. Couples shifted onto the floor. The chair's wife laughed in a way that sounded like relief. Around us, the gala resumed. "Was there anything you wanted to ask me?" I said. Her head jerked back. "No." "I know." "That's a first," I said, and let it be gentle. She tried to smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "You look different." "I am." We stood for a moment in the soft gold of the room we'd both been trained to worship. Then a photographer called her name from across the floor, habit muscle memory, a reflexive tilt of the chin, and she turned out of instinct to face the lens. The flash went off. She didn't pose quickly enough. And in that fraction of a second, the camera caught her exactly as she was not triumphant, not gracious, just pale. I set my empty glass on a passing tray and stepped toward the balcony doors, the air beyond them dark and cool. Lila didn't follow. Behind me, the band shifted keys. Ahead, the night waited with its quiet questions. And somewhere between the two, I felt the smallest tug, an old story loosening its hold. "Come find me after the pledge," Marcus had said with a look. I pushed open the door and went to meet him. The balcony air was crisp, a thin edge of autumn, cutting through the city's lingering heat. Below, headlights streamed along the avenue, weaving in and out like veins carrying some larger unseen pulse. I leaned against the railing for a moment, letting the noise inside dissolve into the hum of traffic. Marcus was there, one hand in his pocket, the other cradling a short glass that glinted amber in the light spilling from the ballroom. He didn't speak right away. That was one of the first things I noticed about him years ago, his ability to leave silence unfilled until it mattered. "You handled that well," he said at last, eyes still on the skyline. "I didn't say anything," I replied. "That's why it worked." A server stepped out, set 2 more glasses on a nearby table, and retreated without a word. The door closed, muffling the gala's polished chatter. We were in our own orbit now. From inside, the pledge drive had begun, cheerful voices urging numbers higher, the soft percussion of credit cards against linen as people signed their names to causes they'd forget by Monday. Out here, the city's rhythm was steadier, less performative. Marcus turned toward me, his expression easy but searching. "She didn't expect me. She never expects consequences," I said. There was no bitterness in my voice, just the weight of a fact worn smooth over time. Lila had been moving through life on the assumption that outcomes bent to her charm, that people forgot the harm if she kept smiling. For years, I'd let her believe it. Tonight, I hadn't needed to correct her, the room had done it for me. "I didn't marry you to make a point," Marcus said, and I believed him. "But I'm not sorry," she saw. I met his gaze. The light caught at the edge of his hair, and for a moment the image felt like something a photographer would stage 2 figures on a balcony, gold behind them, city ahead. But there was nothing staged about this. It was the sum of years neither of us had to explain. Through the glass doors, I caught a glimpse of Lila moving between tables, her smile back in place, but thinner now, brittle at the edges. She laughed at something the chair's wife said, but her hand went to the stem of her glass twice in 10 seconds, a tell I'd known since we were kids. Marcus followed my glance, then let it go. "You don't owe her anything," he said. I know. And I did. The part of me that once needed her recognition was gone, dissolved somewhere between the moment she walked away with my fiancé and the years I spent building a life without her shadow. The pledge drive inside hit a cheer someone had matched a major gift. Applause rolled like a polite wave. Marcus set down his drink. "We should go back in before the chair sends someone. In a minute." We stayed where we were, the sound of the city filling the space between us. Below, a couple walked hand in hand, their heads bent toward each other, in a conversation the rest of the world couldn't touch. I watched them until they disappeared under the canopy of a theater. When we finally stepped back inside, the room was in motion again, tables clinking, waiters clearing the low thrum of people satisfied with themselves. Lila was nowhere in sight. Marcus touched the small of my back. "Ready? Yes," I said. And I wasn't talking about leaving the gala, because somewhere in the quiet after her face went pale, I'd realized this night wasn't about showing her anything. It was about closing the last door she'd left open in my life. As we moved toward the exit, the golden light followed us to the threshold. Then the doors shut behind, and we stepped out into the cool night. No applause, no cameras, just the clean, certain air of something finished. We didn't speak of Lila on the drive home. The city lights slid past the windows, soft blurs in the dark. Marcus's hand rested over mine, steady, unspoken. In the quiet, I thought about the years between losing my first fiancé and marrying Marcus, the long stretch of work of learning to live without proving anything to anyone. I'd built something solid there, brick by brick, so that even tonight's encounter was just a ripple, not a storm. By the time we reached our street, I knew this was the real ending, not the moment she went pale, but the moment I no longer needed her to. The past had already happened. And the future, it was ours untouched. I walked inside, shut the door, and didn't look back.